Brothers and sisters, topic of discussion today is slaves in heaven. Now, for those of you who've not watched my video about everyone goes to heaven, you should go watch it. Subscribe to my YouTube video, and then you could see upcoming topics from there. You could search for videos of interest. But today's topic is slaves in heaven. People don't know that they have slaves in heaven. And in my today's topic, I'm going to come up with different chapters in the OahspeCollegeUniversity that clearly shows you that there are slaves in heaven. And the reason for this topic is that a lot of religion people think that, especially the Christians and the Islam, when they go to heaven, they're just going to have a blissful peace. They're going to sleep in heaven. They're going to rest in heaven comfortably, knowing that this religion gods have a plan for them. They make them slaves. They subject them to do things they were not supposed to do. So I got a couple of verses in the OahspeCollegeUniversity that clearly shows this slavery going in heaven. And the reason why is because these are falsehood gods. These are gods that broke free from serving the Creator. And if you have not watched my video about who and what God is, you should go watch it. That's, God and the Creator are not the same. The Creator do not make slaves of people in heaven. Self-glorified gods, falsehood gods are the ones that make you slave. The religion gods. And in my previous video, I explained who these religion gods are. I clearly stated that Christianity, the Christian God, the Muslim God, the Buddha God, and the Hindu God are your religion gods that make slaves of people in heaven. And also there are other petty gods, other little children gods that do that. And that's because they give you a belief system, and they look for a prophet or soothsayer who could see them, and they give this belief system. And this goes on in a lot of churches. A lot of churches right now, the pastors are under inspiration of a children god, a pagan god, a petty god. For example, the one of those pagan god is the Mormon god, who created Mormonism that we some people follow today. Let me just go to OahspeCollegeUniversity for a minute and break this down. This verses in the OahspeCollegeUniversity that clearly state that there's slavery going on in heaven, and most of them are false gods and goddesses, because a goddess or female goddess can make slave of you too, and you're not knowing that this is the highest heaven. And the truth of the matter is that if your religion does not talk about first, second, and third heaven, and does not talk about interior, the divine heaven, then that God is a fake God. It's a falsehood God. I'm going to have a wonderful topic called falsehood religion in one of my upcoming videos, so you should subscribe and watch out for that. But now today is just to talk about who and what God. Today is just slavery in heaven, slaves in heaven. The topic of today is just slaves in heaven. Here we go. So I'm going to go to the book of Sue, chapter 2, verse 30. The book of Sue, chapter 2, verse 30. Sue said, now, in one of my videos, I'm going to come up with a topic called 24 elders, and I'll break this down. Sue is one of the Ethereal God that came down to our world and ruled us. And Sue came about 21,000 years ago to rule us. And during the Ark Cycle, he came in the 18th Ark Cycle, and he ruled our planet for 3,200 years. And Sue is an Orion chief, so he has a lot of experience, and he came around 21,000 years ago. But if you were to put a timeline using a BCE, so that would be that means Sue came around 1953 all the way down to 16353. So he came 1955 3 BCE to rule us. So that would be 19,553 BCE when it came down to rule. But if you're to use before Kazman, using the timeline on Kazman, then Su came around 21,000 years ago, calculating from 1848. Now I'm going to go to the book of Su because he was an Orion chief, and this was a wonderful angel that came down to break a lot of things free, and he wanted to take an harvest to the ethereal heaven where the bride and bridegroom was kind of going low. Let me just read this. This is slaves in heaven. So the book of Su, chapter 2, verse 30. Su said, "How then did you make slaves of them in the first place?" To which they answered, "The day their mortal bodies died, we took them in, and they never saw or knew any other place in heaven. So we appropriate them to our service, and they dutifully obeyed." You see that? So these are humans that died, and as soon as they died, the falsehood gods, the fake gods, took them to their own heaven. In other words, took them to their own heavenly kingdom and make slaves of them. He said, so we appropriate them to our service, and they dutifully obeyed. Because what happens is when these humans were alive, they didn't know better. They had a different mentality about what heaven is, so they were able to be enslaved right there. You see, let me just read verse 30. Su said, "How then did you make slaves of them in the first place?" To which they answered, "The day their mortal bodies died, we took them in, and they never saw or knew any other place in heaven. So we appropriate them to our service, and they dutifully obeyed." You see that? I'm going to go to another book in OahspeCollegeUniversity. It's called the Book of Osiris, chapter 6, verse 12. The Book of Osiris, chapter 6, verse 12. Osiris is also another god that ruled us, and Osiris, interesting as it is, it's not the same fake Osiris now. They're two different things. But he was an Orion god, and Osiris came around 12,000 years ago before Kazman. So if you're to use the timeline for BCE, he came around 10,353 BCE, all the way down to 7,053 BCE. That's the timeline using the BCE timeline. But if you're to use the Kazman timeline, he came 12,200 before Kazdan, and he ruled all the way down to from 12,200 all the way to 8,900 before Kazman. And Osiris was an Orion god, and he introduced astrology and science. Now I'm just going to read this so that you can see, and I'm coming up to a better thing here, because you're going to see as time goes on, this slavery increased in heaven. So there is slavery in heaven. The book of Osiris, chapter 6, verse 12. You bound your subjects. I'm reading from verse 12. You bound your subjects to your kingdoms, and you now perceive you cannot put them aside. You taught them your kingdoms were all the highest, and of these they must now be unlearned. You taught them that you were the all highest gods. You see? And that's what the religion people tell us. They say that God is the highest. And so when you go to their heaven, when you go to this religion God heaven, when you go to this religious heaven, you're a slave there, and you become unlearned. You don't learn about the higher realms. They don't educate you. They don't put you in educational system, which they're supposed to. They must be unlearned in this also. You put aside the ancient rites and ceremonies in which the name of Jehovah was used, teaching them to sing only to you. You see? And that's what they do. They change things around, and these are the falsehood gods, change things around, and then they teach them new things. But what they teach them is in the boundary of the heaven, nothing beside that. And it's no different. I'm just going to use an example. It's no different. For example, in America, this happened actually. The state of New York have a different teaching than the state of Texas, the state of Alabama, They teach them, but there's similarities. But the teachings that you get in the state of Alabama is actually different from the state of New York. And it's with the law. The laws in New York is actually different than the laws in Alabama, the state of Alabama, the state of Arkansas, the state of Texas. So, they are different. The state of Connecticut have a different law. So this is a similarity here now. And what they teach you there is actually different from the state of Connecticut. And this is the way the religious God operate. But when you look at the way the creators and the creator's angel teach humans and the spirits and angels in heaven, it's unique. They teach them the same thing. And there's a perfect verse in OahspeCollegeUniversity talking about that. But let me continue and let's see what this book of Osiris chapter 6 verse 12 is saying. You put aside the ancient rites and ceremony in which the name of Jehovah was used, teaching them to sing only to you. They must be taught new songs. Stop substituting the Great Spirit. The Great Spirit is the Creator, Jehovah, to whom none can attain forever. You taught them to be unthinking, contented as slaves. Let me read that part again. You taught them to be unthinking and contented as slaves. They must now be taught to think for themselves and to labor for everlasting liberty. And that's what usually happens when you're in this religion God heaven. At one point you start fighting back at them, and then you now start fighting for liberty. It's so sad what these religious people do to us. I'm going to go to the book of Job, chapter 17, verse 8. The next one is the book of Job, chapter 17, verse 8. The spelling of Job is APH. APH, the book of Job, chapter 17, verse 8. Verse 8, here we go. These false gods made slaves of their followers. You hear that? These false gods made slaves of their followers, exerting service, and in return giving pitiful homes and regiment, and by the labor of their slaves embellishing their mansions and cities in Ada. Ada is considered, you could call it lower heaven, or you could call it the lowest heaven. Either way, it's still heaven. And I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with that name, Ada, Hada. You see, let me just read that verse 8 again. These false gods made slaves of their followers, exalting service, and in return giving pitiful homes and regiment, and by the labors of their slaves embellishing their mansions and cities in Ada. You see, they tell the subjects that once served them while mortal, while human, to build their mansion in heaven, in their heavenly kingdom now. This is what these gods are doing. They tell you to serve them, but the way you serve them is you build mansions for them. You repair their heavenly kingdom. They make you a worksman or workwoman if you're a woman. The next chapter, book of Exodus, chapter 51, verse 14 to 17. The book of Exodus, chapter 51, verse 14 to 17. Verse 14. Such was the magnificence of each of the four heavenly places of the four Eden gods, and devouring only a little from one another. In other words, this verse 14 is talking about the four major religion God, which is Christianity, Islam, Buddha, and Hinduism. So they have similarity to how their heavenly kingdom look. Verse 15. In order to obtain privilege of those going to look upon the thrones and his God. You see that? It's saying in order to obtain privilege. In other words, I served, this verse 15 is so funny. Let me finish it for a minute. In order to obtain the privilege of those going to look upon the throne and his God, one had to first serve 100 years in the labor of that heaven, and to have one's record good during all that time. Let's pause for a minute. Verse 15 is saying that in order for you to have the privilege, the permission to see your God, a God that I served. Now, verse 15, I served a God when I was human. Now, when I get to heaven, I need to obtain the privilege, the permission. I need the authority first to actually look upon, not see them now, just to look upon the throne and his God. They're telling me now I need to serve them. For I need to serve. If I need to serve is a form of labor. I need to labor for 100 years. And it didn't say all. He said, and my record when I was human needs to be a good one. In other words, I need to have, did my tithes and offering. I need to pray to him. I need to pray to this God. For example, I need to pray to the Christian God every day. I need to obey his commandment. My record needs to be good. Then they're going to give me they're going to add an extra 100 years labor for me to do in heaven. Then I'll have the privilege to see him. Nonsense. This is what slavery is. This is slavery in heaven. This is what religion. This is the result of you following the Christian religion, the Muslim religion, the Buddha religion, and the Hindu religion. This is the result. This is what you get. You need to serve them in heaven first for 100 years before you have the privilege to see their throne. Verse 16. If in his mortal life a man has served his God by preaching, hear that? Praying or fighting battles for him, and had thus attained a good record, 100 years servitude in heaven entitled him to visit his God on the throne and at the distance named above. You see what verse 16 is saying? So if I have preached about the God, the Christian God, as a pastor, and I bring followers to him, and I pray to him, and I also fight his battle. The battle they're talking here is that you fight against people who say you shouldn't do tithes and offering. So you battle that. You see that? You have no right to talk about God that way. Or when somebody insult the Holy Bible, or you got them saying, you have no right to do that. This is what this verse is saying, that mortal person have a good record. Then that 100 years servitude in heaven is a title. So that's the reward now he or she gets. And then he has the opportunity to visit God on the throne. But they said at the distance now. Verse 17. But if the mortal had been an enemy to the God during his earth life, he could not attain to approach the throne in less than 300 years servitude. You see? So if you're a churchgoer, this is what verse 17 is saying now. I want you to hear clearly what OahspeCollegeUniversity is saying. A lot of people might not understand verse 17, but I am decoding this for you clearly without sugarcoating. But if the mortal have been an enemy to God, in other words, you didn't obey God. This is what this is saying. You did not obey the Christian God, but you're a Christian. But you're a churchgoer. You didn't follow the laws. So they're saying that you need to serve. They're going to give you a service in heaven for 300 years. Which service consists of laboring in building mansions. You see, you're going to build mansions in heaven, or paving roads in heaven, or bringing produce up from the earth, or bringing up other atmospheric elements of the gratification and glory of the God and his 10 of millions of high officers. Verse 17 is just a code breaker. I can't even continue to, I feel like not even going to the next chapter, because the more chapter I go to, the more it's just clear. Verse 17 just breaks it completely. You need to serve for, if you're an enemy of the Christian God, the Muslim God, the Buddha God, the Hindu God, you're going to serve them for 300 years. And part of the service is for you to you're going to labor in building mansions. After everything you go through while you're on earth. You see that? I'm going to go to the next chapter because, this is clear. This is clear. The book of Su, chapter 2, verse 30 is clear. The book of Osiris, chapter 6, verse 12 is clear. The book of Amp, chapter 17, verse 8 is clear. No sugarcoating. Clearly stated. And the book of Ezra, chapter 51, verse 14 to 17. Chapter 51, verse 14 to 17, clearly that's just a code breaker right there. Now I'm going to go to the book of knowledge, chapter 7, verse 15. And then I'm also going to read from verse 19. So verse 15 and 19. And here we go, verse 15. For one people worship Brahma, making a beast of him. Another worship Buddha, another Christ, another Jesus, forever parading his crucifixion. And they all made a beast of their idols. And the beast that which one built up within a soul became an entity to him on his entrance into the spirit life. So, this is clear. And a lot of people do this. They already have an imagination of who Jesus or Christ is. So that's already built up in your soul. So when you enter heaven, this is what that verse is saying, within his soul, becoming an entity to him on his entrance into the spirit life. Into spirit life means into heaven. And he become bound to the imagination of evil spirit, professing to be that beast. And this evil spirit become like gods. In fact, building kingdoms in the lower heavens and making subjects and slaves of their worshippers, compelling them to contribute part of their earning and labor in spirit. Let me pause for a minute. Listen to this carefully. So the mortal become a spirit, and then what they're saying is that the God who built this kingdom in the lower heaven, they make subjects, you see, and slaves of their worshippers. Who are the worshippers? Those are your Christians, your Muslim, your Buddhist, and your Hinduism. So those followers of those four religions are they compel them to contribute part of their earnings and labor in spirit, even as mortal kings exalt tribute. Example, taxes, labor, military service on earth. And these rulers had thousands and millions and 10,000s of millions of subjects and slaves in their cities, whereas represented to mortals paved with comparative pearls and diamonds. And so before Kazman, the organic heavens situated close to the earth were divided up among the four heads of the beast. I did a video about who and what is the beast. You should go watch it. It's just the four major religions that we have out there. And yet beside this, most on or near the earth were many lesser kingdoms of various other false gods. Like I stated before, yeah, you have four major religion gods, and they have four major heavens in heaven. However, there are other little gods, petty gods, like the Mormon heaven, like Mormonism. They have their own heaven too, you see, and false lords, mostly professing to be the true Christ, Jesus, Buddha, Brahma, or Allah. Verse 19, by their preaching, you have evidence of their place in heaven. Whoever practices in them receives his inspiration from the slaves of the beast he proclaimed. You see that? So in other words, this verse 19 just nailed it in the head. You that profess Christ, Jesus, and your God while here on earth, whoever you profess to be your God, then you're going to receive inspiration from that beast in heaven, the beast God. And that God gonna make slave of you. That's exactly what the book of Knowledge chapter 7 verse 15 and 19 is saying. I'm gonna go to the book of Judgment chapter 26 verse 9 to 10. The book of Judgment chapter 26 verse 9 to 10. And after death, these people are prevented by their children masters from entering heavenly places of resurrection, becoming instead slaves in the eastward. Eastward, es is same thing as heaven, to pursue any calling and practice that they may be put upon them. In other words, as you die, they could put these children gods, children masters can put anything upon you to do, and you're going to do it because you believe them to be God while you were human, while you were living in this physical world. Verse 10, for the same rules hold on earth and in heaven regarding the bondage of the mind. If by imposing rites and ceremony and by stratagem and cunning of mortal priests they can be captured on earth, so can they also be retained in bondage in heaven. Let's pause for a minute. The book of Judgment, chapter 26, verse 9 to 10. What verse 10 is actually telling you is very simple. And I'll give you an example. A lot of churches have rites and ceremony. They have this rites and ceremony they follow, and they tell you you must do it. And when you go to these churches, a lot of them, and I repeat this, they'll tell you to read Psalm 23, Psalm 121. They tell you to do all this. What this verse is saying is that the mortal priest they're referring to here is equivalent now that we have is the preachers, the pastors, whatever the pastors tell you to do. So what this verse 10 is saying is that if the pastor or the preacher or the prophet can tell you to read Psalm 23 or Psalm 121 or Psalm 191 or Psalm 91, and if you can do it while you're human in our physical world, then you can do the same in heaven, because what it's saying here is that what is the same concept. So your mind is fixated to that. You see how they make slaves of people, how they make slaves of people in heaven. I'm going to go to the next two following chapters, and I'll call it a day. There's no sugarcoating in OahspeCollegeUniversity. OahspeCollegeUniversity is so clear, This next chapter is the book of Exodus, chapter 52, verse 7 to 8 and 21 to 22. The book of Ezra, chapter 52, verse 7 to 8 and verse 21 to 22. Verse 7. Because you knew that Jehovah is God, appointed Ashars to mutter. Ashars are guardian angels. Because you knew that Jehovah is God, appointed Ashars to mortals, you have also appointed Ashars to them, though not for their resurrection. You see that? But to raise up mortals with faith in yourselves. So you have faith in God, faith in Jesus, faith in Jesus, faith in Jesus Christ, faith in God, faith in Jesus. You have faith in your God. What this verse is saying that is that the religion gods have also created, make for themselves guardian angels. Verse 8. In this way, you have built on earth for the glory of your own kingdoms. For your Ashars, for your guardian angels, Ashars are guardian angels. For your guardian angels, teach mortals not of external resurrection, but for attaining to your heavens only. You see, verse 21. And your guardian angels inspire mortal priests. Priest equivalent to those now will be your pastors, your preachers, your prophet, to do the same thing for their mortal followers for stipulated prices in money. You see that? Now the stipulated prices, we can say, is your tithes and offering that these churches tell you to make. And you've got prophets and preachers and pastors that tell you should give them $1,000 or give them $200. They'll pray for you and your sins will be forgiven. They'll pray for you that your generational curses, the spiritual problems you're having, will be taken away. But give us money. And this is very familiar nowadays. You've got the pastors, the preachers, they're asking for money. If you don't give them money, they will not pray for you. You see that? Let me read verse 21 again. And your Ashars inspire mortal priests to do the same things for their mortal followers for stipulated prices in money. Verse 22. Thus your Ashars prepare mortals to become slaves in your heavenly kingdoms that they build for your own personal glory. The last chapter, the book of Osiris, chapter 3, verse 22. Book of Osiris, the book of Osiris, chapter 3, verse 22. Yester said to Utaya, now I will give you a lesson in righteousness. For you shall educate and develop all these hosts for your former slaves to your own level. Before you raise yourself to the tiniest fraction, do not think it is easy to assume to be a god or a lord or even a mortal king. Those who make servants of others must also raise them up to be angels of light. You see that? So what this verse is saying is that, yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, make slaves of them. But at the end of the day, you still have to come back and teach them. Because if you don't teach them, if you don't rise them up into the higher grades, into the higher heavens, you'll be bound to false resurrection heaven. And the highest you guards and you preachers and you pastors are going to go a second resurrection heaven. You can't go higher than that until you've raised the lowest member that you've deceived. I'm going to have an upcoming topic called falsehood religion. In there, I'm going to explain a lot of things. But this year is just slaves in heaven. So I'm going to continue reading. Heaven is just as well as bountiful. To whom Jehovah has given bountifully, it is commanded he shall give bountifully. For hundreds of years you have the service of these helpless creatures. So now you shall serve them by making them intelligent men and women. Yes, till the lowest of them are your equals, of whom you can be proud, and say before the Father, behold my sister, behold my brother. You, Utaya, shall not be free. In other words, what this verse is saying that, yeah, you've made slaves of these people, but you shall not be free until you've raised them to a proper grade, to an accepted grade, in order for them to become bride and bridegroom in the third heaven. You guards, you preachers, you pastors, you prophets shall not be free. This is what this last verse, this verse 22 from the book of Hosea chapter 3 is really saying. You see, that's what he's saying. Brothers and sisters, yeah, you have it. Slaves in heaven. There are plenty of verses in the OahspeCollegeUniversity that talks about this. But I had to bring out the necessary ones that was needed for this topic. Upcoming topics will be falsehood religion. My next topic after this, it will be falsehood religion. Light and peace, brothers and sisters. And if you have not subscribed to my YouTube video, I'm going to encourage you to do so, because the OahspeCollegeUniversity have dedicated the time to free people and bring a higher light so that we can understand the difference between the low graded teaching and the higher graded teaching. Light and peace, brothers and sisters. Bye-bye now.